Greetings and good evening to one and all present here. I am Anand Kumar. For the next 1.5 hours, I am going to be your host and the moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of my team AP Legal Chambers and on my personal behalf, I welcome all of you for this 21st and special webinar of the series. The title of today's webinar is Media Trail versus Fair Trail by our special speaker, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, advocate, columnist, author, and former resident editor, NDTV 24/7. I welcome all our participants. There are loads and loads of webinars happening, and in fact, we are all flooded with webinars. But in spite of that, on a Sunday evening, we have got this uh, 50 plus crowd here. That is basically because of two reasons. One is due to the continuous support and patronage from our regular participants, and number two being the presence of the special speaker, Sanjay Pinto. We are just facilitators, and in fact, we are just setting up a stage for our special speaker to connect with the participants and vice versa. I'd like to make a few things clear before we go into the webinar. Kindly mute the audios from your end, and if possible, disable the video itself. The session is a completely moderated one, and once after this special speaker's presentation, the APLC's APLC and question answer session would follow. So if you have any questions to ask our special speaker, you may kindly leave them in the chat box, and if time permits, all your questions will be answered by him. Those who are all attending our webinars regularly, you might be knowing us. For those who have come here for the first time, we are Team AP Legal Chambers, a new age law firm in Delhi NCR with a branch office in Chennai. Things started to fall in place in 2017, and we started this firm with the resolve to provide legal solutions to our clients with the best of our abilities. APLC has been providing specialized services in the field of domestic and international taxation, criminal law, constitutional law, IPR, energy laws, commercial advisory, arbitration, and corporate compliances. We started organizing these webinars out of our passion for law, and due to the extremely positive response from the participants, we are continuing this webinar series. As always, once the presentation of our special speaker gets over, APLC's APLC, Ask the Popular Learned Council, would follow. We have prepared a set of questions from our end, and we will be shooting them to our special speaker. I am sure this will be both interesting and informative. Coming to today's topic, media is considered as the fourth pillar of the democracy. Media is generally termed as the mirror or the reflection of the happenings in the society. Media is supposed to bring the news to the public without any prejudice, fear, or favor. We have seen in the last 7.5 decades how our media houses have evolved over a period of time. Media includes print, visual, and social media. In India, we have complete freedom for present press. They cover the news and current happenings even in the most difficult times. We have seen in the last 4 5 months how our news reporters are covering the corona news, the pandemic, when the entire nation is under the lockdown. They brought the news to our living rooms. They toiled so that we can watch the news sitting at the convenience of our houses. AP Legal Chambers at this juncture salute the brave journalists and their team for their selfless services for this nation. But as always, there is a caveat behind it. Just like a coin has two sides to it, the media channels also has got two sides to it. In today's webinar, we try to find out what the media trail is and what a fair trail is. So here, even the media, it takes up a particular issue and starts the media trail before the actual judicial trial starts. We can safely say few journalists and channels pass a verdict or brand an accused as guilty or not guilty via media trial. Just when the newsrooms started to cover judicial overreach, APLC here tries to cover the media overreach, media trial, and the mainstream media's coverage in making or breaking an individual or an issue. One more point which APLC tries to see is the impact of social media trials. There are anonymous Chief Justice of Honorable Social Media of India. There are people who conduct social media trials in Facebook, Twitter, etc., and also circulate fake news. The credibility of the information that is received in the social media is always at question, and people are always supposed to take it with a pinch of salt. So with these things, we have decided to hear it out from our special speaker who has extensive knowledge in media line as well as in law. I take immense pleasure in introducing our special speaker of today, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, who has been successful in newsroom as well as in courtroom. Before donning the black gown as an advocate in the Madras High Court, where he specializes in media, criminal, constitutional, corporate, arbitration, and consumer cases representing celebrity clients, Mr. Sanjay was the resident editor of the NDTV 24/7 and the executive editor of the NDTV Hindu. A household name and the face of NDTV in South India for 15 years, Sanjay has reported breaking news developments from South India and has anchored a slew of popular news bulletins and signature shows of NDTV. Sanjay wears many hats as a legal columnist of Deccan Chronicle with over 250 published legal columns till date, and a columnist of Ritz Magazine, a political analyst on national TV channels, and Mr. Sanjay has also authored three best-selling books, My NDTV Days, Justice for All, and Speakers Are Made, Not Born. And Sanjay is a mentor of the Silver Tongue Academy resource that mentors youngsters in public speaking. This former national debating champion and gold medalist with a record 106 victories in intercollegial debates representing Loyola College and the Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College is a recipient of Rotary Awards for his excellence in the media and law. Sanjay has represented India in the IBLP program on the rule of law and judicial reforms in the USA in 2014 and is the guest lecturer on media law at the National Law Schools in India. With this introduction, I take immense pleasure in welcoming our special speaker of the day, Mr. Sanjay, and as just like you people, I am also eagerly waiting to listen to his speech. Now, I wholeheartedly welcome Sanjay to APLC's webinar and I hand over the session to Mr. Sanjay. Thank you and over to you. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I request the participant to kindly stop presenting so that we can start the session. Greetings and good evening to one and all present here. I am Anand Kumar. For the next 1.5 hours, I am going to be your host and the moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of my team AP Legal Chambers and on my personal behalf, I welcome all of you for this 21st and special webinar of the series. The title of today's webinar is Media Trial versus Fair Trial by our special speaker, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, advocate, columnist, author, and former resident editor, NDTV 24/7. I welcome all our participants. There are loads and loads of webinars happening, and in fact, we are all flooded with webinars. But in spite of that, on a Sunday evening, we have got this 50 plus crowd here. That is basically because of two reasons. One is due to the continuous support and patronage from our regular participants, and number two being the presence of the special speaker, Sanjay Pinto. We are just facilitators, and in fact, we are just setting up a stage for our special speaker to connect with the participants and vice versa. I'd like to make a few things clear before we go into the webinar. Kindly mute the audios from your end, and if possible, disable the video. The session is a completely moderated one, and once after this special speaker's presentation, the APLC's APLC and question answer session would follow. So if you have any questions to ask our special speaker, you may kindly leave them in the chat box, and if time permits, all your questions will be answered by him. Those who are all attending our webinars regularly, you might be knowing us. For those who have come here for the first time, we are Team AP Legal Chambers, a new age law firm in Delhi NCR with a branch office in Chennai. Things started to fall in place in 2017, and we started this firm with the resolve to provide legal solutions to our clients with the best of our abilities. APLC has been providing specialized services in the field of domestic and international taxation, criminal law, constitutional law, IPR, energy laws, commercial advisory, arbitration, and corporate compliances. We started organizing these webinars out of our passion for law, and due to the extremely positive response from the participants, we are continuing this webinar series. As always, once the presentation of our special speaker gets over, APLC's APLC, Ask the Popular Learned Council, would follow. We have prepared a set of questions from our end, and we will be shooting them to our special speaker. I am sure this will be both interesting and informative. Coming to today's topic, media is considered as the fourth pillar of the democracy. Media is generally termed as the mirror or the reflection of the happenings in the society. Media is supposed to bring the news to the public without any prejudice, fear, or favor. We have seen in the last 7.5 decades how our media houses have evolved over a period of time. Media includes print, visual, and social media. In India, we have complete freedom for press and press. They cover the news and current happenings even in the most difficult times. We have seen in the last 4 5 months how our news reporters are covering the corona news, the pandemic, when the entire nation is under the lockdown. They brought the news to our living rooms. They toiled so that we can watch the news sitting at the convenience of our houses. AP Legal Chambers at this juncture salute the brave journalists and their team for their selfless services for this nation. But as always, there is a caveat behind it. Just like a coin has two sides to it, the media channels also has got two sides to it. In today's webinar, we try to find out what the media trail is and what a fair trial is. So here, even the media, it takes up a particular issue and starts the media trail before the actual judicial trial starts. We can safely say few journalists and channels pass a verdict or brand an accused as guilty or not guilty via media trial. Just when the newsrooms started to cover judicial overreach, APLC here tries to cover the media overreach, media trial, and the mainstream media's coverage in making or breaking an individual or an issue. One more point which APLC tries to see is the impact of social media trials. There are anonymous Chief Justice of Honorable Social Media of India. There are people who conduct social media trials in Facebook, Twitter, etc., and also circulate fake news. The credibility of the information that is received in the social media is always at question, and people are always supposed to take it with a pinch of salt. So with these things, we have decided to hear it out from our special speaker who has extensive knowledge in media line as well as in law. I take immense pleasure in introducing our special speaker of today, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, who has been successful in newsroom as well as in courtroom. Before donning the black gown as an advocate in the Madras High Court, where he specializes in media, criminal, constitutional, corporate, arbitration, and consumer cases representing celebrity clients, Mr. Sanjay was the resident editor of the NDTV 24/7 and the executive editor of the NDTV Hindu. A household name and the face of NDTV in South India for 15 years, Sanjay has reported breaking news developments from South India and has anchored a slew of popular news bulletins and signature shows of NDTV. Sanjay wears many hats as a legal columnist of Deccan Chronicle with over 250 published legal columns till date, and a columnist of Ritz magazine, a political analyst on national TV channels, and Mr. Sanjay has also authored three best-selling books: My NDTV Days, Justice for All, and Speakers Are Made, Not Born. And Sanjay is a mentor of the Silver Tongue Academy resource that mentors youngsters in public speaking. This former national debating champion and gold medalist with a record 106 victories in intercollegiate debates representing Loyola College and the Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College is a recipient of Rotary Awards for his excellence in the media and law. Sanjay has represented India in the IVLP program on the rule of law and judicial reforms in the USA in 2014 and is the guest lecturer on media law at the National Law Schools in India. With this introduction, I take immense pleasure in welcoming our special speaker of the day, Mr. Sanjay. And as just like you people, I am also eagerly waiting to listen to his speech. Now, I wholeheartedly welcome Sanjay to APLC's webinar, and I hand over the session to Mr. Sanjay. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Anand. Good evening. The Greek philosopher Socrates was arguably the most discerning consumer of news during his time. That's when he propounded the triple filter test. Is it right? Is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? Now, how many TV channels, how many media houses today will pass that test? But a more realistic definition of journalism is that news is what someone, somewhere wants suppressed. Everything else is public relations. So, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully in this webinar, I will bridge the gap between these two extremes. As Anand said, having been in the newsroom as well as in the courtroom today, I believe at the outset that there is a lack of understanding about how newsrooms function and how courtrooms function. In the court of public opinion, prime time television anchors, social media influencers, print and digital journalists can play judges, jury, and executioners in sensational cases. This fundamental canon of criminal jurisprudence, the presumption of innocence, can be turned spliced statements, speculation, allegations of the he said, she said variety, hashtags, and trends are treated like evidence, wittingly or unwittingly. Now, no comments can be construed as a sign of guilt. A well thought out and carefully vetted response may be interpreted as damage control. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before the advent of the electronic media, before the Contempt of Courts Act came into being, and obviously before the social media came into existence, what did the courts rule? What was the court's take on media trial? The Supreme Court in Saibal Kumar Gupta versus BK Senner observed that it would be mischievous for a newspaper to systematically conduct a parallel investigation into a case. The Punjab High Court in Rao Harinarayan Singh versus Gumani Ram Arya was more scathing in its view that liberty of the press is subordinate to the proper administration of justice. The plain duty of a journalist, the court believed then, was reporting and not adjudication of cases. I don't agree, because times, ladies and gentlemen, have changed. Today, investigative journalism is a reality, and thank God for that, because but for a vigilant media, many scams, in fact, no scam would have been exposed had it not been for the media. The media is one of the four estates of democracy. The media is a watchdog. The media must bark and also be allowed to bite in certain cases. And it draws that legitimacy of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. And that freedom extends to viewers and to readers. But this fundamental right is not unbridled. This fundamental right comes with reasonable restrictions under Article 19, Clause 2, such as contempt of court. Now, here's the catch and the clash of constitutional and statutory safeguards. Ladies and gentlemen, every time a person's guilt is pronounced on TV or on the social media, someone's right to a fair trial is violated. And this right to a fair trial is inherent in Article 21, which protects personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. Procedure established by law. And procedure established by law is not an editorial agenda of a media house. It is not a trend on the social media. Which is why, if you remember in that landmark case of Zahira Shah versus State of Gujarat, in 2006, the Supreme Court was categorical that a fair trial obviously would mean a trial before an impartial judge, a trial before a fair prosecutor, and a trial in an atmosphere of judicial calm. Note those key words, judicial calm, ladies and gentlemen. I wonder today, with primetime debates holding people accountable, guilty, all kinds of statements being made, all kinds of witnesses being proved in, with OB-Van standing outside court buildings doing saturation coverage, whether we can afford to have that judicial calm that the Supreme Court spoke about. Every time, ladies and gentlemen, people are prematurely maligned in the media, their right to reputation is hit. So the Supreme Court in Subramanian Swamy versus Union of India 2016, which refused to decriminalize defamation, and held that reputation was both a fundamental and a human right. Every time an individual is hauled over the coals in the media, it could be an infringement of Article 22, Clause 2, as punishment twice for the same offense or double jeopardy. Every time a person is grilled in TV debates and forced to give a yes or no reply, it could affect his right under Article 22(3) and being compelled to be a witness against himself, although, as we know, such statements do not have any evidentiary value. Now, don't forget, penal provisions of defamation under Sections 499, punishable under Section 500 of the IPC. Don't forget the prohibition of disclosure of identity of victims under Section 228A of the IPC, or children in conflict with law under the Juvenile Justice Act. Don't forget Section 2C of the Contempt of Courts Act, which in fact bars acts that cause prejudice or interference with the course of any judicial proceeding or obstruction to the administration of justice. Don't forget that even Section 8(1)(j) of the Right to Information Act, the RTI Act, exempts the disclosure of personal information which have no direct relationship to any public activity or causes unwanted invasion of privacy, even of those holding public office. Don't forget international laws on the presumption of innocence under Article 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or Article 14(2) of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, as a former TV journalist myself, as a former bureau chief and resident editor, I do believe that the media has a right to not just report. The media has a constitutionally guaranteed right to also analyze, to interpret, and investigate happenings in public interest. The media has the right to investigate happenings in public interest. Remember, even the Contempt of Courts Act under Section 3, Clause 1 exempts innocent publication, and Section 4 protects accurate and fair reporting of judicial proceedings. Now, the line must be drawn so that investigation does not stray into adjudication. Let me say that again. The line must be drawn so that investigation does not stray into adjudication, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is the domain of the courts and the courts alone. But that's easier said than done. We are not living in some ivory chamber here, some ivory tower here. Responsible content, to be brutally frank with you, content that is not sensational does not attract eyeballs. At the end of the day, the media is a business as well. Masala attracts eyeballs. So if Oscar Wilde once put, moderation is a fatal thing, nothing succeeds like excess. A TV anchor had once joked that I don't mind this rat race for TRPs as long as I am the lead rat. But Are we demonizing TRPs? Why should we demonize TRPs? Is TRP such a bad thing? At the end of the day, everybody wants commercial success, and this is a barometer of commercial success. But then TRPs today are more for channels which have slanging matches every night. I know of several people who watch these debates on mute. They just like to see. There's a voyeuristic streak in all of us. Right now, when you're watching a webinar, there's some fight happening outside your window. Chances are that you will log out of this webinar and go and watch what's happening there. That's the way we are. So therefore, there is a market. There is a market for slanging matches. Whatever we criticize, whatever we are disenchanted with, there is a market out there whether we like it or not. Now, there is a market, and these 24-hour news channels are like a monster that we've created, and they need to be fed 24/7. And that is why a developing news story is milked beyond its natural shelf life. Let's be clear about it. Now, why do people have these shows, these debates regularly every night, even on weekends, special shows on weekends? It's because it costs less to have to invite a few regular suspects, motor mouths you may call them, to come into the studio and start shouting at each other, than to actually commission travel for a journalist to go out there, pound the pavement and do real journalism. This is a fact that nobody will tell you. So my advice to all of us as viewers is that just like we watch movies with a willing suspension of disbelief, you need to watch TV debates through your own prism of fairness and common sense. Because it's time for viewers, we all talk about the role of the media, the responsibility of the media. We as viewers, as readers, also have responsibility. Responsibility to be vigilant, responsibility to not be gullible, responsibility to use our discretion and sense of balance. Now, a lot of people believe that the media is completely unregulated, they are a law unto themselves. That's not entirely correct. Whether it was the recent Sushant Singh Rajput case, or the Sunanda Pushkar case in the past, all those insensitive, remember when actress Sridevi died, those bathtub reconstructions that we saw on TV, extremely bad taste. There is today a need for self-regulation. There is a need for introspection in the media. Ironically, ladies and gentlemen, the Sridevi coverage, the insensitive coverage that we saw, came close on the heels of the 9-member constitution bench or the Supreme Court and Justice case, Puttaswamy versus Union of India, which upheld privacy as a fundamental right. Now, the News Broadcasters Association has a set of principles of self-regulation. They were framed in 2008. I am told that they are still valid. I'm not sure if they've been updated as yet. But they have several clauses, in fact, of self-regulation. Now, if you look at clause 6 of the News Broadcasters Association, it very clearly talks about, privacy, invasion of privacy. It says, to be monitored by a jury of its peers, channels must not intrude on private lives or personal affairs of individuals unless there is a clearly established and identifiable public interest for such a broadcast. An intrusion of private spaces must not be for salacious interest. Clause 6. Clause 9 talks about something that is hotly debated today, sting operations. Sting operations, the regulations say, should be a last resort, and sex and sleaze must not be allowed as a means to carry out sting operations. There should be no deliberate alteration of visuals or editing or misrepresenting or interposing done with raw footage. Now, although the term reconstruction has not been mentioned in the broadcasting regulations, alteration of visuals, because reconstruction technically can only originate, like from a crime scene, you have people, the police taking the accused to a crime scene and asking them to reconstruct. So reconstruction can originate only when there is an eyewitness or the people concerned. Reconstruction cannot be fictional. Unfortunately, that's what happens every time, because people want to get eyeballs and they want to be creative. And that, I think, is in bad taste, and that is something should be disallowed. Now, there is again a misconception that the moment you enter public life, you surrender your privacy. That is so untrue, because public figures, ladies and gentlemen, are also entitled to privacy. We remember what happened during the 75-day hospitalization of former Chief Minister Ms. Jayalalitha. There were several people who said, we want to know this, we want to know that, we want pictures, we want that. Of course, the hospital is giving out periodic medical bulletins. The families have a right, in fact, when people die as well, the families have a right to grieve in peace, because public interest is not the same as public public curiosity. Public interest is not necessarily what the public is interested in. Those lines get blurred whenever a celebrity, whenever a newsmaker either is admitted in hospital or dies. So these lines have to be redrawn. Now there is another misconception that the moment person dies, there's no defamation. For instance, in the Sushant Singh Rajput case, there are several rumors that are doing the round, speculation. Many of you would probably say that it's because of the relentless media crusade, if you like to call it. A CBI probe has now been ordered. That's again a matter of opinion. We can delve into that during our question and answer session. I'd be happy to hear what some of you have to say about it. But remember, explanation 1 of section 499 of the Indian Penal Code on defamation refers to defamation or imputation of anything to a deceased person if that imputation would cause harm to that person if alive. It also talks about anything that is intended to be hurtful to the feelings of his family or other near relatives. So you can't really get away by saying things about somebody who's dead, saying that there are no legal rights, because the family can sue you for defamation. You could get into trouble up to 2 years imprisonment, as you know, under 500 IPC. And then comes our favorite part, as Anand rightly flagged, the social media. I do consider that the social media today occupies a pivotal role in public discourse. And I would even go to the extent of calling the social media the fifth estate of democracy. After the media, the mainstream media, the social media has a place. It's the fifth estate of democracy, because let's face it, it's here to stay. There's no wishing away the social media today. And the social media in many cases has been responsible for a mass clamor of justice. And that augurs well for our democratic setup. But ideally, the two forms of the media, the mainstream media and the social media, can function like a double-barrel gun. Because we have seen that whenever we witness the tyranny of distance in the south or the northeast when it comes to coverage, the social media holds a mirror to the mainstream media, whether it was the Chennai floods, whether it was the migrant crisis. The social media has not taken sides in that sense. Although there are planted posts, there is anonymity that I will come to later. By and large, the social media can be credited for building up pressure on the authorities to galvanize them into action. But its downside cannot be swept under the carpet. Those frenzied hashtags, those hasty conclusions, that irresponsible speculation during investigation and trial go against the rule of law. Remember, the social media is not a reservoir of expertise. In the marketplace of public opinion and perception, buoyed by a herd mentality, the social media has a temptation to sound politically correct, and impulse can often eclipse reason, particularly during an evolving news stories. Now, there is also a lot of ignorance that is on display by the social media. I'll give you a couple of examples. Recently, there were scores of handles that came up with hashtags with the name of a minor rape victim, oblivious of the prohibition to disclose the identity under section 228A of the IPC. And that was trending. There was a hashtag. And then there were those who questioned the change of judges hearing the Satankulam custodial torture and double murder case in Tuticorin district, blissfully unaware of the fact of a routine roster change in the Madras High Court every 3 months. So rumors rule, and there is no patience for proof. And I think the biggest drawback of the social media, and that's something that these media sites, these giants, these behemoths should actually deal with and address it. Right now, for some reason, I get the feeling that we suffer from some sort of ostrich tendency. We want to bury our head in the sand, and we don't want to address this issue of anonymity. Because there are anonymous handles, pseudonyms, they're very abusive. The most abusive handles on Twitter are anonymous. They won't have their picture, they won't have their real names, they'll have some pseudonym. Now imagine having the power to publish a newspaper without the statutory declaration of the name and address of the owner, the printer, the publisher, the editor who's responsible for the selection of news under Section 5 of the Press and Registration of Books Act. Imagine having a gun license, having arms and ammunition without having a gun license. Why, imagine even having a SIM card without having to give your name and address and proof of identity and proof of address. Really even come and take your fingerprint sometimes. Now imagine making calls, and if you can actually make anonymous calls. There was a time when you could actually, for VIP numbers, you could actually block your caller identity. Today, of course, it's extremely tightly regulated. So Here, you can actually create a lot of trouble. You can create a communal riot by being anonymous. So that is something, that's a danger that we need to address. Much as we stand for free speech, in fact, it was ironic that the social media, which went hammer and tongs about the Satankulam double murder and custodial torture, and rightly so, the very next breath, they started glorifying police encounters. So there's no consistency there. Now, in written submissions, yes, the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, in that Shreya Singhal versus Union of India case, had struck down Section 66A of the Information Technology Act, a rather draconian provision which criminalized even acts that cause annoyance to someone. So the Union government, in its written submissions, and I'm quoting this because I think it's very pertinent here. The government said any individual using a smartphone can create and publish abusive material and make it available to trillions of people by just one click. Now, in terms of solutions, the Law Commission of India, in its 200th report, had flagged this aspect of prejudicial impact on the suspects, the accused, the witnesses, even judges. It cautioned us that even if a person is ultimately acquitted in a case, it's very difficult to undo the damage done to his reputation, because character assassination is a sped arrow, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing you can do about it after that. And somehow we live in a society where anything negative of a person, about a person, is believed, anything positive is taken with a big lump of salt. So the Delhi High Court in Swatantra Kumar versus Indian Express Limited had opined that media coverage can prejudicially affect the public mind, and there is a real and tangible risk of the plaintiff not getting a fair trial. Now, there are other aspects in terms of criminal law as to the dangers of a media trial. For instance, when you telecast or publish pictures of a suspect during an identification parade under the Code of Criminal Procedure Code, there could be criminal procedure, there could be practical issues there. The Supreme Court in the Malu Sharma case, better known as the Jessica Lal case, Siddhartha Vashisht versus State of NCT, had observed that the presumption of innocence of an accused should not be destroyed at the very threshold through the process of a media trial. And that too when investigation is pending. In many cases, investigation would be pending. Yes, there would be questions asked. People will say the police, the state police is not doing his job, city police is not doing his job, transfer it to the CBCID. It's almost like a graded, calibrated appeal that's made, or a demand that's made. All right, we have no faith in the state police as well, transfer it to the CBI. It's not as if, yes, the CBI may have better resources, but in some cases, local conditions could pose a challenge. It's not as if the CBI is the last word when it comes to investigation, but there is a clamor for a CBI inquiry for everything. That is something we need to relook at. And we must also understand that when the identity of witnesses is revealed, they run the risk of coming under pressure. Remember, there is no witness protection program in India, unlike some other countries. And therefore, these witnesses can be harmed. They may be constrained to retract their statements early on, or even turn hostile during the trial. But having said all this, we must acknowledge and we must appreciate and congratulate sections of the media, the responsible sections of the media that have campaigned in several cases, and their campaigns and their crusades have led to a retrial of many sensational cases in our country. They have led to a retrial, and therefore we must give credit where it is due. So what is the way out now? What is the way out? The Law Commission had mooted an amendment to the Contempt of Courts Act to enable the invoking of Section 32, Section 3, Clause 2, to invoke contempt not just from the charge sheet stage, but also from the arrest itself. Now, this I think would amount to pre-censorship, and I don't. Mr. Rohit Ram Patabi Ram, I think you need to unmute yourself. I do not back for pre-censorship. With most TV channels conducting sting operations, the Supreme Court took a balanced view. In fact, in R.K. Anand versus Registrar Delhi High Court, the Supreme Court said, and I quote, "It would be a sad day for the court to employ the media for setting its own house in order. And the media would certainly not relish the role of being snoopers to the court." It added that to insist on a sting operation concerning a trial must be done subject to the prior consent and permission of the court would tantamount to pre-censorship. The Delhi High Court also is in sync with what I had told you, that this would amount to pre-censorship. It's not advisable. And the court noted that a sting is based on essentially on deception, and therefore it would attract legal restrictions with far greater stringency. Now, if I were to do introspection myself, the 15 years that I spent in the national television journalism, I've done many sting operations. There were CBI inquiries ordered after some of my stories. Would I do the same thing today? Uh, to a large extent, I would be more cautious. I would be more concerned. I would say I would be more conscious of the rights of accused people, because somewhere in this rush, in this rough and tumble of daily news gathering, we sometimes lose sight of constitutional safeguards. And to that extent, I feel that my former colleagues also need to fall in line, that there has to be some kind of brainstorming, there has to be some a meeting of minds and proper self-regulation. I think self-regulation is the best bet. Because, ladies and gentlemen, let's face it, it's all right to argue that a media trial should not affect judges. Judges should be insulated from what the public opinion is at the moment. Judges should be made of sterner stuff. But I'd like to quote Justice Benjamin Cardozo of the US Supreme Court, who said, "The great tides and currents which engulf the rest of men do not turn aside in their course and pass the judges by. The media has a right, the media has a duty to expose wrongdoing in our society. But the media must also remember that what's just another story, what's just another 9 p.m. primetime show is also someone's reputation." Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sanjay, for this wonderful presentation. In fact, this is like hearing from the master. Since you have traveled on both the lines, media as well as law, you have shared your opinion and you have also covered upon very important aspect of media's reach or the overreach. In fact, so I hope all the participants would have also got the information and the required information in this particular field. So moving on to the next segment, which is called APLC's APLC, Ask the Popular Learned Council. So, Mr. Sanjay, we have prepared a few questions from our end. So, before the participants start asking the questions, we would just ask a few questions to you. So, starting on a breezy note, Sanjay has switched from being a journalist to one of the most sought after advocates in Madras High Court. So, take us through your journey. So, how easy or difficult was it to change from the media room to courtroom?
Okay. In fact, I've written several articles on this, and perhaps trying to write a book also. My journey from the courtroom, from the newsroom to the courtroom. But essentially, one glaring difference between the two worlds is speed. In television news, breaking news, there is no deadline. It's all seconds. How many seconds before the next other person that you can get the news up on air? In court, there are adjournments that go on for weeks and months, and sometimes cases drag on for years together. So the pace, the change of pace between journalism and the legal arena was something that jolted me initially. Not that I was not aware of it, because I had been going to, while I was a journalist 15 years in television, I was a journalist right from my school days. So technically, I was a journalist for about 22, 23 years. And now I'm an advocate now for close to 10 years now. But I had been going to the court even as a school boy from class 4 and 5 onwards, because my father was a litigant. So I used to go to the Madras High Court. I still remember the case numbers and all that. So my elder sister is a lawyer. I have lawyers in the family. So most dinner table conversations would revolve around cases in court. And I remember as a 5th standard student reading up about specific relief and the specific performance of the contract and all that. So journalism was, in a sense, I was like a prodigal son doing a homecoming of sorts, because I had graduated in law in 97. And then there was this compulsory, Bar Council had introduced a compulsory apprenticeship rule. At that point, I got into NDTV, so because I was employed, I couldn't get enrolled. So only after I resigned and I left NDTV that I got enrolled. I often wish that, like Shop Service Commission, like people who joined the police after serving in the army, that some of the seniority would be transferred there. I often, it's just wishful thinking, the optimism that they would probably transfer, because I used to do a lot of court reporting. I covered the most sensational cases from Tamil Nadu in the High Court, a lot of cases involving political leaders. So therefore, law was something that I used to breathe even when I was a journalist. Apart from the speed, the other thing is a very practical aspect is when you're a journalist, you get a fixed salary at the end of the month. As a lawyer, it all depends on during the lockdown, you know what's happening. As a lawyer, it's your income is not fixed. So I really wish your words turned prophetic when you said the most sought after advocate in Chennai. I hope that comes true because that's not true as of now. So that is one, the sourcing work, and people continue to see you through the prism of journalism. That has to change. That is another difference. But I think there are a lot of similarities between both these professions. At the end of the day, whether you're a television journalist or whether you're a lawyer, it's communication. It's drafting quickly. It's the ability to condense your thoughts. It's the ability to sell an idea. It's the ability to convince people, whether you're convincing viewers or judge in court. The only difference is that there I was speaking into a camera, you're speaking to a live audience. And having been a national debating champion from college, this is something that I relish. So for me, actually, when people ask me, oh, you made that switch, actually, it's not a switch. It's, I would say, I naturally gravitated back to being a prodigal son, returning to a profession that I was trained in. Anand?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. So, can you tell us how was it on the first day when you just switched from being a journalist and entered the gates of Madras High Court and went inside as an advocate?
Yeah, I mean, you're used to wearing, semi-formal clothes, attire-wise, wear the gown and all that. I remember after the enrollment straight, a senior of mine in school was senior counsel. Then he took me to the national NCLT. So I had a glimpse there. Initially, a lot of judges whom I covered their case proceedings in the past. It took a while for them to recognize me in my gown. And when I put a picture on Facebook, a colleague of mine who was covering, for NDTV, who she was reporting from France. She said, Sanjay, what is this? I see you dressed up like a lawyer. So I said, I'm not dressed up like a lawyer. I am a lawyer today. So a lot of people, when they see you on TV and suddenly they see you wearing a lawyer's gown, they get a little surprised. But I was lucky that some of the people I had interviewed as a journalist, newsmakers, some of them became my clients. And I earned my spurs, if I can say so, in that landmark case of Deepika Pallikal, whom I represented in a consumer case against a big bank. And the court had given, awarded exemplary damages for deficiency in service. So, yes, the switch has been, it's been seamless at one level, but also sometimes these other practical difficulties are there.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Now, quickly moving on to the next question. So, you touched upon one of the instances where, and you talked about former Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, Ms. Jayalalitha. So, rewind and tell us, tell to our participants about the wonderful incident when the CM's convoy stopped and the Chief Minister talked to you.
Okay, I think that was in 2011, April or May 2011. I was covering the former Chief Minister's election campaign. And I was doing a show. It was an election flagship show of NDTV called Follow the Leader, where you actually spend 24 hours with the leader right from the time they start their campaign to the time they retreat to their hotel rooms or homes, wherever they are staying. So there I was doing a piece to camera as part of this half-hour show, and suddenly I found that the convoy stopped in a dusty road, and then the security guards came around and said, Madam is calling in. She wanted to know what I was doing, so I told her the program, and then we exchanged pleasantries and a few questions, a short interview, and that was it. But there was another time when this actually went viral. I mean, I didn't even release this, but after she died, I don't believe in taking advantage of any proximity to. In fact, I have friends across the political divide. Former Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Dr. Kalaignar also was extremely kind to me, extremely very, very humble and unassuming person. So across the political divide, I had connections, and I've never misused any of these. I've never asked for favors. I never will. And as long as you're fair, people like you if you're fair. As long as you're not biased. Today, I don't know how many people can afford to be unbiased. Those were the days when, we had a free run where we were largely independent. Things have changed a lot in the time I left. So my former colleagues must be having a hard time now, given the constraints that they work under, the extremely difficult constraints that they work under. But there was another time when after Ms. Jayalalitha had met BJP leader Mr. L.K. Advani at the secretariat. I had done, I think, a program which we normally do. One year in office, you look at the pros and cons. You do a critical appraisal of 1 year in office. So suddenly she spun around and said, "Where's Sanjay? Where's Sanjay Pinto?" And then called out to me just to thank me. So what was exchanged there, which was not audible, she just said, "Thank you. You did a fair job." And mind you, that was not an adulatory piece. That story was actually a fairly critical piece on her 1 year in office. But since I gave credit where it is due, it seemed to pass muster with her. So she basically thanked me. What she said in those few seconds of interaction was thank you, and then she went back. But then calling out to a journalist after a press conference and having a little talk on the sidelines was not something very common. So therefore, I think there was a lot of people wanted to know what exactly was said. So this is what she actually communicated.
Yeah. Thank you. It was good to.
I remember also, Anand, in fact, my former colleague in NDTV, Pankaj Pachori, who was then advisor to the Prime Minister, media advisor to the Prime Minister, he sent me a message saying, "What did Amma tell you?" And there were other people who sent me messages saying, jocularly, of course, what Rajya Sabha nomination won. I said, no, I have never such political ambitions. So a lot of the rumor mills were activated at that point, but then, well, we just take it in our stride and laugh it off.
Yeah. And don't you think, Mr. Sanjay, it is a gradual progression from being a media person to an advocate and then getting a Rajya Sabha ticket?
a lot of lawyers have gone down that route, but that's not something that I am interested in. Politics is a definite no. In fact, my home minister in the house, my wife, is very clear that I should never get into politics, and I'm not frankly, I'm not cut out for it. I'm quite happy being a lawyer. I enjoy being a lawyer. I enjoy arguing. I enjoy communication. I enjoy a good fight in court. I enjoy the freedom to do different things, to actually make the most of my time. So the kind of things that I've done since I left mainstream journalism to become a lawyer, I have more time at my disposal now and more freedom. So I quite like this current lifestyle. I'm just waiting for physical hearing in courts to resume.
Yes. In fact, once if the Home Minister says there is no argument, there is no appeal. So that is the final word.
No appeal, absolutely no appeal. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Now, quickly moving on to the next question, which is related to our topic. So, what is this concept called breaking news? And do you think accessing the classified files or releasing important pieces of information to public? So, is it ethically correct on the part of the journalists or the media houses to do it? And how do you see as an advocate now?
Okay. As long as something is not expressly barred by the Official Secrets Act, as long as something is in public interest, the journalists, media definitely have a right to, to information through sources. See, several times I'll tell you, even the so-called media trial, you will find some disgruntled officer who is doing the investigation. He's not happy with the directions given to him. He will selectively leak information to select journalists, and then they come out with what they call a scoop, what they call an exclusive. It's happened several times. Now I'll tell you, even during the Kanchi Shankaracharya trial that I had covered, I was very conscious that he was a much revered religious leader, and therefore one had to be extra cautious in reporting things and not fall for any kind of speculation. There was a time when I think one channel, I want to name that channel, I was then reporting in Kalavai after he was released on bail. He went straight to Kalavai. I was reporting there, and one channel came up with some breaking news that about some alleged confession, and all hell broke loose. Then I remember my then political editor Rajdeep Sardesai, who was then with us. In fact, most leading journalists today were born and brought up in NDTV. So Rajdeep called me and said, "Sanjay, what is this? We missed the story." I said, "No. Admission or confession, whatever alleged admission or confession before a police officer is inadmissible. Why should we even bother about this? How do we know? How can we take them at face value? So let's not do the story." And he agreed with me. You know why? Because Rajdeep is also an advocate turned journalist. Rajdeep had practiced in the Mumbai High Court. Very few people know that. And he understood that. And he was a very reasonable person. And we did not carry that story. So therefore, you need to be, one, you need to have legal knowledge. I think that's very important. I know there was a proposal to ensure that those who do the court beat should actually have a law degree. While that may not be possible to actually implement it, it does help. It does help because you'll be able to understand. I know several people who get confused between judicial custody and police custody, between CBCID and CBI, between detention and arrest, right? So I think media houses need to invest a little in terms of legal resources, in terms of having an in-house lawyer, or at least have some arrangement with lawyers to look at scripts more closely, to look at bulletins, to advise them on where they are going wrong. Because people say a lot of things live in the heat of the moment, trying to score brownie points over the other channel. Breaking news, sometimes I wonder, I think it's a bit crazy. It's not as if people are sitting in a Vivek and Co showroom with 25 TVs with stopwatches waiting to see who broke the news first. I've always believed that getting the news right is better than getting it first, because there are, as I said in my conclusion, that reputations are at stake. So one has to be a little cautious. I'm not saying sit over it, because television is a medium which is like, it's quick. They say television is literature in a hurry. So you can't afford to keep sitting and cross-checking because you don't have the luxury of a print deadline. Print journalists have a deadline where they say they close the edition at a certain time. Television journalists, how fast you can get it up, there's no deadline. So that speed can actually often kill accuracy. And speed can make people become reckless, irresponsible, just with this temptation of getting the news first, just to make it to that breaking news ticker.
Yes, in fact, every day it has now become a trend to actually, whether it is a breaking or not, we need to actually release a breaking news segment. In fact, just like you rightly touched upon.
I'll tell you something, during cricket matches, I'll give you an example. It's hilarious. During cricket matches, when everybody, the rest of the country is watching live telecast, many news channels, and I've argued with my own channel also in the past, let's just cut to the live telecast, or let's just give them updates. They would ask people, what do you feel about Sachin's knock? What do you feel about Kohli's knock? What do you feel about that drop catch and all that? And then somebody's birthday, they will go and cut a cake and all that. And then you will have breaking news. Virat Kohli scores a century. People are watching it live on the main channel. Why do you call that breaking news? The concept of breaking news has become a little hilarious sometimes. Not just breaking news, exclusive. There's something called a simulator. I'm letting out a lot of secrets on your AP Legal Chambers webinar. There's something called a SimSat, which is a television jargon. It stands for simulated satellite. So suppose you want to interview me. You will do an interview, record an interview, all right, and you will ask me questions. Then you will go back to your office, uplink that to your headquarters, and at 9 o'clock, the anchor in the studio will act as if he or she is asking me questions. So it's what they call a fake live or a mock live. Now at 9 o'clock, the other channels would have also done the same thing. It happened during A.R. Rahman when he won the Oscars, right? So I had interviewed him. I did the interview soon after. It was a stampede-like situation in the airport. Went to his house, 3 in the morning, did that interview with Rahman holding up both the Oscars and all that, and dedicating it to the youth and all that. Went back, uplinked it. At 9 o'clock, they asked me again. Before that, they asked me to go again and do another interview with him, so that the anchor in the Delhi studio would ask questions. Now at 9 o'clock in the night, he'll be live in 4 channels, 5 channels. I thought only God was omnipresent. But newsmakers will be live in different channels at the same time. How is that possible? This is how it is. The medium has become a little superficial. And they should understand that viewers are not fools anymore.
Yes, in fact, more than this, we have got the insider information from you, directly from you. And just like rightly you touched upon this one, about the basic knowledge which the journalist should possess. It is like the horses for the races. In fact, when somebody is covering the stock market news, at least that he or she should have the basic knowledge about the stock market. And in fact, that applies to all the people. And in fact, we can see of late, we can see those people who are covering exclusively in the Honorable Supreme Court. Actually, they have developed their own flair for getting the information or reading the judgment and all. So, in a way that people have started.
Some of the legal journalists, those journalists in India, I'll tell you, especially in Tamil Nadu, and I'm sure in Delhi as well, there are some very, very seasoned legal journalists who know. In fact, there are some of my friends, former colleagues, who are also lawyers, and for some reason went back to journalism. I think, the last man standing. I'm the only one who's probably not gone back to journalism after trying it out in law. But I tell you that the quality of legal reporting that we have, but those who are dedicated, I'm talking about the dedicated legal reporters. You don't have the luxury of specialization or beats in a television channel. But in a print, in a newspaper, you have those beats. So those will only go to the High Court, those will only go to the Supreme Court, those who will do tribunals. Those journalists are excellent. Their understanding of news, the way they cover news, that's excellent. The problem is in television, since there's no time for specialization, and there are only one or two host bureaus today across the country in TV channels, just one person. And now you have the Mojo concept of mobile journalist. The same, the reporter is also holding the camera, he's also uplinking. So you're downsizing a lot. So where's the time to actually specialize? So as far as the newspaper coverage of legal issues is concerned, it's completely different, at a totally different league compared to what we view as breaking news on TV channels.
Yes, in fact,
And legal websites also. We have some very credible legal websites like Bar and Bench and Live Law. I think they're doing a phenomenal job today in keeping us up to date with happenings in the court.
yes. No, in fact, talking about this, when the Ram Janmabhoomi judgment and the Maharashtra, this particular election judgment came, I was there in the Honorable Supreme Court, and I saw visibly how the print media journalists and the what do you call the press people, how they differently took approach to this particular case. In fact, the people at the press, they were far more relaxed, and they were not in a hurry to release the information. But in fact, this the media people, they were in a hurry, and in fact, all those SMS, the short message service was sent as the shortest message service. I don't know how they could disappear the actual information that was sent to them. Anyway, we could actually see visibly the difference in the approach of these people, in fact. Now, thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Now, quickly moving on to this next question. You talked about the seasoned journalists and all. So, do you accept this term called this national media?
Sometimes it's the notional media rather than national media. I often used to joke with my office that, New Delhi television is literally New Delhi television because you don't bother about the South. But now, of course, the South gets a better deal compared to at least the Northeast. Um, let's say if there's an ankle deep water in Delhi or Bombay, that becomes national news. But you have floods in Chennai or somewhere else in Northeast. It'll take a lot of uproar, usually in the social media, for people to wake up. That's why I spoke about the tyranny of distance. I spoke about the social media calling to attention the tyranny of distance in the national media. So national media, yes, in terms of national presence, national footprint, national TV channels. But yes, I mean, newspapers, yes, depending on the editions. But in terms of national equal coverage of all states, there's a lot that's left to be desired.
Do you also accept that the generally accepted, the generally complained this thing about this disproportionate coverage of different states of India?
Definitely. Anything that happens in Delhi or Bombay gets saturation coverage. But if it happens in the South, I totally was opposed to this thing of this very term say down South, a very condescending approach. Just look down and see what these guys are doing down South. Let's go to the Northeast just for some tokenism. I think we need to have proper representation. A story should be judged on its news value, not on its location. But again, I'm told I'm not able to understand this particular aspect. I'm glad you asked this. Some of my former colleagues in the distribution business told me that the viewership of television news in the South is about 54%. I'm talking about a few years ago. So when there's greater viewership in the South, why is that the South doesn't get that 50% coverage at least here? On NDTV, we had a program and other channels followed suit called Southern Edition. It was like an opt-out technology where only in the South you could see this. In the rest of the country, they would see the regular national news. That became extremely popular. That program became extremely popular, but for some reason, people could not stomach its success, and therefore it was shelved. Don't ask me more than that.
No, in fact, this when you're talking about the success, this itself I feel is a discrimination to the southern states and the northeastern states. covering an exclusive
Yeah, also I'll
news
tell you.
article for yeah.
Yes. See, the mindset also, when people call to invite you on shows and all that, they just break into Hindi. So I reply in Tamil. Okay, so why is that? For instance, I'm glad even the other day, DMK MP Kanimuri raised that very important issue at the airport where the CISF person said, spoke in Hindi and said, if you can't understand Hindi, aren't you, from India? So this feeling of superiority, just because, I think there's this linguistic chauvinism also at play there. So somehow I feel that, this mindset has to change. People break into Hindi even during show. I remember there was on one of our programs on Big Fight where late senior journalist Gnani, another time Gnani, true to his self, the very combative self, answered in Tamil. Those are like that's priceless footage. You can check it online. It's still there in the archives.
Yes, in fact, I vividly remember he refused to speak in English because the other participant actually started speaking in Hindi, so he also started speaking in Tamil. Then, now, quickly moving on to this particular, once we have raised this issue of national media, so don't you think media houses, why one media house makes one particular incident sensational, but does not give equal importance to other coverages? But some other news channel gives importance to some other incident and does not give the equal importance to the other incident which is covered by some other news channel. So it is because to carry out the exclusive coverage, or do you think is there any other some other internal understanding between these two between the media houses, so that they will be able to give it to the audience whatever is the piece of information that they want to give it to them?
See, as I told you earlier, the media is a business today. Yes, the people still call it a vocation and all that, but it's largely a business. It hinges on commercial success. The person who pays the piper calls the tune, right? So it's entirely the editorial call of the freedom of this of speech and expression today. To be very honest, is freedom of the media barons as to what they want put out. So editorial guidelines, editorial meetings, and all that. There are people who there are certain fixed, guidelines that are given out to them, and accordingly they fall in line. And I must say that to a large extent, and whether this is a welcome feature or not, to a large extent, it is a welcome feature. The social media is actually dictating the agenda of the of mainstream media. I know of several editors who walk into the daily news meetings. The first question they ask is, "What is trending? What is trending?" So you see, one is pushing the agenda of the other. The social media has become all powerful today, and everybody wants to be on the good side of the social media. Therefore, when you have with great power comes great responsibility. So when you have such a powerful medium, the greater is the need for accountability, for some kind of checks and balances to weed out this anonymity and this abuse and all that on the social media. I think it's a great medium that can be exploited for overall good of society.
Yes, very well put. Actually, moving on to the next question. So, most of the people in general think that the media houses or the media barons or journalists are leaning left. So, what is your opinion, Mr. Sanjay?
Today,
Yes, the general perception about the media or the general complaint about the media houses or the journalists is that they are leaning left. They are left leaning.
I don't agree at all. I feel that large sections of the media today have become cheerleaders of the establishment. So maybe in the past, but today I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think they're leaning left at all. Maybe sections of them, but by and large, you can see it in coverage yourselves. I mean, what are the kind of tough questions asked? I can go on and on, but then I'd be digressing from the topic. But I don't agree that they're leaning left. Not today.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your opinion. Now, quickly moving on to the next question. So, do you think while covering a particular trial, Do you think religion or caste comes in between a fair reporting and or a fair news article?
No, it does not, and it should not. I don't think that should ever be a factor at all. It's just as long as you are factually correct, as long as you are accurate in your reporting, I don't think that's a completely extraneous factor that should never come into play. That should never come into play. And I think today journalism is almost, in a sense, the duty of a journalist is in many ways sacred. And truth is sacred, facts are sacred, and extraneous factors like the ones you mentioned should never interfere with reportage today.
So is it the ground reality, Mr. Sanjay?
No, I don't think so. There could be, see, everywhere there could be exceptions everywhere. There could be aberrations. There could be fringes. There could be sections of the media that probably toe a certain line. But I don't think it wouldn't be fair to say that that's the rule today. It could be an exception in some cases, but even in those cases, we need to see real evidence on hand.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Now we will just take a few questions asked by our participants, and we have one question reserved for the last from our end. So, Mr. Prakash Kumar, one of our regular participants, he is an advocate practicing in Jharkhand High Court in Ranchi. He states, according to the criminal jurisprudence, a suspect or an accused is entitled to a fair trial and is presumed to be innocent till proven guilty by the court of law. So none can be allowed to judge his case till the completion of his trial. However, media, on the account of excessive coverage, goes beyond its domain and publishes and covers the interviews of witnesses and relatives of the victims and prejudges the issues of the conviction of the accused. So what is your say on this?
And I dealt with that extensively. I don't know with Mr. Prakash actually had heard the entire webinar, but I completely agree with him. In fact, I had spoken about it very at the outset itself about the presumption of innocence, about the facet of a fair trial, which is inherent in Article 21 of the Constitution. I referred to the Zahira Shah case where they spoke about the presumption of innocence, an atmosphere of judicial calm. I spoke about the Law Commission recommendations in its 200th report. I spoke about the specific recommendation that it should be from the time of arrest itself, where Section 3(2) of the Contempt of Courts Act should be made applicable for incorrect reporting. I, for one, believe, in fact, I told you I took a balanced view of the whole thing, having been in both in the media as well in the past, that the media can investigate, but the media should stop short of adjudication. That line has to be drawn. That constitutional line of control can never be breached, because that, as I say, is the province of the court. The moment you cross that line, that's when media trial starts, and that's when all the problems start, and that's when you interfere with somebody's fundamental right to a free trial, the presumption of innocence, which is a fundamental canon of criminal jurisprudence. You interfere with the several other constitutional safeguards, several other statutory safeguards. All those are violated the moment you start adjudicating and don't stop with reporting or investigating.
Yes, that was excellently put, Mr. Sanjay. Now, Mr. Arul Raghu wants to know which job you like very much, whether it is advocacy or journalism.
And I told you, journalism also involved advocacy in a sense, because you had to study issues, you had to report live, you had to anchor shows, you had to do your research. So a lot of people, in fact, they say, oh, what is it? Why did you make a switch? From there you came here and all that. How do you manage in courts and all that? And I can only be reminded of that last scene in that blockbuster Hollywood film, A Few Good Men, where Tom Cruise plays the role of a lawyer who defends US Marines who are dishonorably discharged. And after telling the Marines that you don't need a badge to have honor, he looks around because Tom Cruise was a young guy, and a lot of people were apprehensive as to how he would be able to conduct such a high-profile trial. So after he won that case and he got them actually acquitted, he looked around the open court hall and said, "Oh, this is what a courtroom looks like." So for all those who wonder whether I believe that there's a lot in common between journalism and advocacy. It's home ground for me, and I do enjoy my profession. yes, there are a lot of legal reforms that I've been pushing for in my weekly legal columns. But frankly, I see this as a very seamless transition in my case.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, sir. Now, quickly moving on to the next question asked by our another regular participant, Ms. Vandana Singh. She is a professor in Amity University. She wants to know, isn't media trial the antithesis of the rule of law?
Yes, I think Professor Vandana has nailed it. It is indeed the antithesis of the rule of law for all the reasons I had mentioned. The rule of law involves a fair trial, and these sort of external factors and trying to put pressure and influencing the outcome of a case is definitely not acceptable. So I completely agree with Professor Vandana.
Yes, sir. Now, another regular participant, Mr. Krishnan, has asked, media has started taking blind political stands, and when they go wrong, they get exposed. Is it not embarrassing? Fourth pillar would become weak if this continues. Your thoughts, please.
It is definitely embarrassing. I think many media houses should understand that there's a revolving door on politics. Somebody in power today is in the opposition tomorrow, and I think they should be loyal to the truth. They should only report the truth and not take sides. The moment you start taking sides, you stop being a journalist and you become like you fall prey to those who want to influence the outcome and pollute your editorial thinking and your integrity as a journalist.
Yes, sir. Very rightly said. Now, quickly moving on to the next question, Mr. Aravind Shaktivelu has asked, Sir, we discussed about the media debate, but many times even a normal news is being dramatized with tags like public opinion, a contempt, a public demands an encounter where actually it is not. Any provision in law to prevent these kind of dramatizing a news with background music, etc. As an ardent news reader, we need old fashioned DD type news at least once in a day.
I can see where the gentleman is coming from, and I too share his concerns. But we must understand, see, those were the days when you had Doordarshan News. Doordarshan was a state broadcaster. So you wouldn't really have too many things critical about the state government. Privatization has been a good thing for the media, especially the electronic media. You must make a distinction between news readers and news anchors. News readers are those who will read from the teleprompter, right? So they are not journalists. They're news readers. In a sense, they are part of the news production. They read what is there in the prompter. News anchors are seasoned journalists who've been there, done that, who've been on the field, who have reported themselves, who sit in the studio and bring that credibility from the field to the studio. And there they're able to ask questions, cross question, and all that. But yes, I would put it slightly differently. So there was a time when Prannoy Roy started the World This Week, and all of us have grown up watching the World This Week. Many of us, at least my generation, where you had news, and even after that we had the News Tonight and all that, and then before, and when NDTV 24/7 was started, there was a time, I would say maybe about 10, 15 years ago, when 9 o'clock news, you had news stories from across the country. Across the country, you had about 10, 15 stories every day where if you wanted to get what's happening in the country, instead of having to wait for the next day's newspaper, you would watch that 9 o'clock bulletin and get a ringside view of news across the country. We don't have that anymore. For the reason I mentioned in my talk, that it is much cheaper to call a few people who come and make some noise in the studio and fill up a 1 hour slot. It doesn't cost anything. But to actually commission stories for people to travel, to take a flight, to take a train, to go out, to have producers produce that, to edit that, all that post production work, that costs a lot of money. So a lot of channels take the easy way out. But a time will come when most people are disenchanted with sections of the media. Let's face it. Media is fast losing credibility, at least the electronic media. It's time they return to that old practice of having news. Views, there can always be a separate show for views and for opinions and all that. But the primary mainstay of a news channel is news. Give them news, give them packaged news, edited news, so that the scripts are well vetted. There are good visuals, proper, voiceovers are there. That quality is somehow lacking today. So I agree with the gentleman that yes, we do need. I'm not sure of the DD style news, but I would say World This Week style news. That is something, if you can bring back, if you can revive that, that would be good for all of us.
Yes, Mr. Sanjay. In fact, quality is getting compromised because of this 24 hours telecast, and in fact, whatever was telecasted the previous day, the same is being continued in the next day also. But the news is being actually telecasted
Because
as
24 hours, you have to keep it
yes.
going. Absolutely, you have to keep it going. It's like a soap opera almost. See, I'll give you another example where you have a lot of youngsters who man the social media desks of news channels today. A newsroom is generally a very young place. A lot of youngsters. The average age group is between 22 to 30. A very young crowd there. And all of us, yes, we've all grown up making mistakes and all that. But sometimes when they call you, you have a separate news desk. You have a guest relations desk where they call you, invite panelists for shows, and they would call you and say, sometimes they won't even be aware of the actual topic. See, subject is different from topic. For instance, during Ms. Jayalalitha's hospitalization, they would say, sir, can you come join us at 9 o'clock? What's the topic? Sir, Jayalalitha. I said, what about Ms. Jayalalitha? Sir, hospitalization. So what about the hospitalization? That is the subject. What is the topic? Is the topic privacy? Is the topic, there has to be a topic. And then there's this false binary that goes on air. So you may take a neutral view, but in those boxes, there are some 10 people enough to play a cricket match in each show. Okay. You have small boxes. And then when you speak, they'll put Sanjay Pinto or against, or media trial against media trial. So people seeing it, and sometimes a lot of people watch it on mute. They get a very different opinion. They get a wrong impression about what you've spoken. They start branding you and pigeonholing you into certain silos. And this format must change. In fact, what is a debate? A debate is contrarian views, differing viewpoints. And unless you have the patience and the decency to hear what the other person is saying, instead of trying to outshout the other and make a big noise and tamasha out there, such a mockery today. These are not fit to be called debates. For some reason, I don't know why we call them debates. Debates are when you listen to the other person. You have the patience to listen, counter them with logic, with humor, with the grace to listen, with the grace to respond politely. All that's like, even look at the social media today is following that. You put some view contrary to they start calling you names. Why can't you disagree without being disagreeable? No, that is something I really wish we change the rules of public discourse and engagement in our country.
Yes, in fact, it was wonderful that you touched about this debate, talking about fair time and debate. Now it has become like 4 versus 1, a handicap debate, where 4 people are given 5 minutes each. That amounts to 20 minutes, while the 5th person is also given only 5 minutes to counter the points. In fact, isn't it fair to give him 20 minutes to actually counter all the 4 persons' views? And in fact, every time when there is a 3 versus 1 or 4 versus 1, it always takes a one-sided stand, and we know actually where it is heading to. So this has become actually a mockery of the actual debate.
See, the very caption of the debate would be the outcome would lie in the caption itself. Okay, so several times they are not even Stevens at all. The anchor, the channel will have a particular agenda. They will have a stand. They have a preconceived stand already there. If, in many cases, I'm not saying all channels, many channels, if the anchor realizes, in fact, they will ask you sometimes, so what is your stand on this? So I'll tell them, come back to me and tell me whether this is my stand. There are some panels, no matter what, just to come and show their face on TV. I'm fed up of showing my face on TV. I've done it for 15 years, more than that. But some people to come on TV, anything, what stand do you want me to take? I'll come. Where is our intellectual honesty? If you have a stand, if you have a certain ideology, you have a particular stand on an issue. See, today I'm speaking on media trial and I'm being scathing in my comments. I'm, calling a spade a spade. But tomorrow you tell me, come and speak about, defend the media, speak against the media, right? It doesn't make sense. So a lot of these people go there, and if they take the side of the anchor, they are allowed to speak. There are times when you sit on a show for 1 hour. 1 hour you would have done research, and then you'll find people putting their finger up. It's like almost like umpires giving a decision, And then you'll have the anchor who will talk. The anchor should be the one who talks the least. They said the anchor is hogging the whole limelight. That's this new format. And sometimes you sit for 1 hour, fully gung-ho, ready to prepare and ready to fire from all cylinders, and you'll be given 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and those 15 seconds, somebody will be shouting in the background. So it can be extremely. If you have low blood pressure, you can do two things. One is you can go on today in some on go to some TV debates on certain channels, or you can go and engage on Twitter.
Yes. No, in fact, recently one of these actresses from South India, Kollywood, was seen actually taking her food in one of her national media debates, because she ultimately said anyway she is not going
No,
to.
see, the thing is, how long if you're hungry, if you're sitting there.
No, no. The actual answer was
So I saw that. I saw.
yes, Mr. Sanjay.
No, actually, I saw that thing, and I actually don't blame. I saw that the clip. I didn't see it live, but I saw it later. I think she was right. I mean, I don't blame her at all. How long sometimes do you wait? I mean, you can't keep waiting for 1 hour. A lot of people will feel hungry on the show, and sometimes it's also good to give it back. There are times when I've even walked out of debates. There are times when, and all this is drama. People like to show all that. For instance, I remember one channel when spokesperson of a particular political party didn't show up. They kept an empty seat there. They said, "Look, we have 1 hour show. Anytime this party wants to send somebody, the seat is still vacant. The empty seat was shown there." So somebody eating on screen, I don't blame that person at all. It's a very human thing, and nothing wrong. Like for instance, I'm constantly sipping water, warm water during my talks. Nothing wrong as long as you're not doing something which is objectionable. I think eating was a very natural thing.
Yeah.
Good to give sound bites, pun unintended.
Yes, exactly. Uh, So, Sanjay, you may have a different opinion, but I feel the opinion polls and exit polls are the biggest scams that are orchestrated by the media during the elections. What is your take on this?
Are you talking about opinion polls or exit polls?
Yeah, both in fact, both in fact, the surveys, the opinion polls, and the exit polls. Even though the timing and the
See, opinion. I have a different take.
yeah, yeah, please.
See, I'll tell you what the problem is. See, as far as opinion polls are concerned, I think that the news channels are well within their rights to commission anyone to do opinion polls. How honest they are, or whether there are other considerations involved, we don't know. As far as exit polls are, and as far as opinion polls are concerned, let me finish that point. For instance, when you drink a cup of tea, you don't, you can, by and large, the first or second sips, you know whether there's sugar or not. Sugar may be at the bottom, not properly stirred. But one sip you'll be able to tell, so it's like a sampling mechanism that they use. As far as exit polls are concerned, we have elections in different phases in our country, different states in different phases. So if you're going to actually come up with exit poll results in one particular state, you are actually prejudicing the outcome of the overall election in the country. So I have a problem with that as far as exit polls are concerned. So I agree with you. I believe that exit polls where the election commission needs to come up with some very stringent guidelines, because you're trying to almost tell, this guy is losing, this person is winning, and some people may try and switch sides. Voters are, the thinking of voters may be influenced. All this should be part of a model code of conduct. When you say before 48 hours you can have to stop polling and all that, exit polls would actually undermine that fairness.
Yes. In fact, Election Commission of India conducts the national elections in a phased manner. The result of an
Yes,
exit
that's
poll
what
in
I
one
said.
particular state actually has a direct impact on the neighboring state or some other
Yes,
state for that matter.
yes, yes.
So this, I think, has got will definitely have a negative impact in the minds of the voters. So I think this is one of the biggest scams
Yes.
as far as the media are concerned. Now, quickly moving on to the next question, Mr. Uttara Kumar wants to know. Uh, we have discussed about journalism and advocacy, whether media has any limit in investigating. So where does it stop? Where the media needs to stop? So when we actually, in fact, just adding
Okay,
one
good.
more
Actually,
small, yeah, just adding one more small question along with this, tagging a small question. So we see some reporters actually went and tracked the presence of the so-called the wanted accused in different parts of India. They get access. Actually, the media people get access. The media, the press people get access. But where is the actual limit, and where does one needs to stop? The media needs to stop its investigation.
I think that's a very good question asked by Mr. Uttara Kumar. In my presentation, I do a distinction between investigation and adjudication. So that line must be respected. Now, the question is about investigation. To what extent can you go? I, for one, strongly believe that journalists should not be allowed to tamper or to contaminate a crime scene. Journalists are not investigators in that sense, right? They don't have statutory powers to investigate a crime. But yes, in terms of their investigative journalism, they can report on an ongoing investigation without in any way forming their own conclusions, leaving it for the viewers to decide. Reporting of facts is a very thin line there. So one, no contamination of the crime scene, no tampering with witnesses, and trying to influence people to say certain things, to not say certain things. All that, I think they have to respect their boundaries there. The problem arises. See, for instance, you talk of judicial activism. We talk about several other things. When there is in the four estates of democracy, when there is a vacuum, when one particular pillar doesn't do its job, the other goes and fills it up. But there also it has to be well circumscribed. So as far as investigation is concerned, you cannot, for instance, start contacting witnesses. You can't start intimidating people. You can't start entering a crime scene, polluting the evidence there. All that's very important. You can't do that. So there has to be. That's why I said there has to be self-regulation, and people have to be taught that that's far and no further.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Now, last question coming up for the day. We have seen important breaking news like actors in one of the Bollywood actors' residents, they are not getting electricity or not getting water. To some of the most unimportant cases like Jessica Lal's murder case, Sridevi's case, or Sushant Singh Rajput's case. So, as a former media person, tell me which one particular case do you think personally the media has handled it professionally and impartially, and for which Sanjay would like to give a credit to the media houses.
Mm.
Okay. There are several, and it's difficult to really pinpoint one of them. But I remember, I think when the Babri Masjid judgment came out, the High Court judgment came out. Prior to that, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting had issued detailed guidelines saying that you shall not show certain visuals. Very detailed guidelines were issued. You should not show the visuals of the mosque being demolished. You should not carry statements which should lead to communal riots. Very well drafted guidelines were issued, and I'm happy to say that every single media channel fell in line. So that was a case where when guidelines were issued, they fell in line. Uh, I also believe that when it comes to today, when it comes to natural disasters, even look at COVID. You rightly said at the beginning in your introductory remarks. I know of so many journalists who are exposing themselves to this while we are sitting in the comfort of our homes, going out in the front lines from ground zero reporting, getting infected, being hospitalized, quarantined. Not, I know of journalists who have not been able to go and even attend the funerals of their relatives and their near and dear ones, coming back to duty. You find doctors, you find police officials doing it, you find journalists doing this. So journalists are in the forefront, they are on the front line. And I think we need to give them credit for that. The way journalists handle natural disasters, I think, is exemplary in our country. There may be cases of insensitivity here and there, but they put themselves at risk. I have covered so many natural disasters. I have covered the aftermath of bomb blasts. I have covered air crashes. I have covered communal riots. I have covered riots inside central prison. I have covered the tsunami. I have covered cyclones and floods. So you put yourself at risk, and people should understand that. So when you watch the comfort of your homes, somebody out there who's risked their lives to bring you that story. So I think by and large, coverage of natural disasters, but yes, sometimes the national media is a little late to wake up to the magnitude of natural disasters. And I spoke about the tyranny of distance in the south, the northeast. As long as it's out of Delhi or Bombay, sometimes they need to be given a little jolt to actually wake up and and realize that there are people who are suffering and they need to their plight needs to be showcased.
Yes, so Mr. Sanjay, according to you, the Babri Masjid, the High Court's verdict, that is the one of the most satisfying cases where the media handled it professionally.
Yes, the media fell in line. What I meant to say is the media fell in line there. And as far as natural disasters are concerned, subject to the rider of tyranny of distance, by and large, even with COVID, I think the media has done a great job. We look at, for instance, I give you a look at Barka Dutt, whatever people talk about her. She's now practically on her own now. The kind of travel she has done completely, I mean, 4 5 months together on the road, bringing you slices of that through her, her channel. I think that's amazing. I mean, people should give credit where it's due. So many reporters, especially the reporters, I'm not talking about the anchors on the studio who hog all the limelight. The reporters who are at the cutting edge of journalism, they are risking their lives. They're getting infected. They're getting quarantined. They're getting hospitalized. They're coming back after the recovery and coming back to the field and are back there to do their duty. And that's something I think we should salute them for.
Yes, the AP Legal Chamber again takes this opportunity to salute these warriors. But in fact, I would just like to get a clarification from you. Do we need, does the media house need particularly the guidelines to be issued from the central government or the Ministry of Broadcasting every time to actually cover a news article? So aren't they supposed to actually carry out these news articles by following certain guidelines and ethics?
See, before even in a courtroom, before the hearing of any sensational case, you'll find the judges making a little announcement saying that please maintain calm and all that, right? So that's natural. Before any big event, it's natural to have a reiteration of certain rules, perhaps new rules, perhaps old ones being reminded, reiterated. So therefore, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And if there are reasonable rules that are, as long as they don't interfere with the freedom of speech and expression, as long as they fall within those reasonable restrictions under 19(2), I think those are fine. Nothing wrong in reiteration of news by a government agency.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Your last few points before actually closing this webinar, we would like to hear from you. Closing remarks.
Okay. As I said, a media trial can cut both ways. A media trial can actually further the cause of justice. It can also interfere with the cause of justice. And therefore, it needs to be made very clear to journalists who are reporting from the field, or those who are sitting in their studio and taking editorial stances, that there has to be a distinction very clearly drawn between investigation, between reporting and adjudication. As far as adjudication is concerned, that is definitely a no entry as far as the media is concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. It was really wonderful having you on board. And in fact, it was a thorough session where we were able to actually drift through this media as well as the legal field. In fact, one of the erudite scholars yourself and well acquainted with both these areas of practice, your expertise has actually helped all the participants here to have a clarity on the media trial as well as the fair trial. And whatever points you have discussed today, I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways for our participants to actually go home and actually after this webinar to actually ponder over these points. So from the bottom of our heart, from my heart, on behalf of my team, AP Legal Chambers, I wholeheartedly thank you for coming on board and sharing your wonderful experience. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay.
Thank you, Anand. Pleasure being on your webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. So on behalf of my team, AP Legal Chambers, and on my personal behalf, it is Anand signing off. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you. Jai Hind.